welcome to this episode of Business Spotlight. I'm Bronwyn Seaborne. Well, South Africa's energy crisis has been well documented, debated and covered by the media. But while that has been going on, the country and in fact Africa's next crisis has been lurking in the wings. And today we shine a light on that. And joining me to discuss this in more detail is Dean Muruven, who's an Associate Director at Boston Consulting Group. Dean, thanks so much for joining us. So we've battled through power issues, but it's now that water takes center stage. Why is water the next crisis point?
Well, thanks, Bronwyn. I think the first point to recognize is that South Africa is fundamentally, by definition, a water-scarce country, right? So that's not helping us. But we do have a couple of key reasons why water is coming to the fore at the moment. So one, it's typically exacerbated by the climate crisis, right? You can go as far as saying the climate crisis is a water crisis. Secondly, we haven't been great at actually managing our water resources, both our engineered infrastructure that delivers our water. We constantly hear about aging infrastructure, our leaking pipes, right? And just a significant amount of money that it'll cost us over the next 10 years, going into the billions, just to get the infrastructure up to speed. So we're seeing that play out in real time. I mean, I live in Johannesburg, and we're about to experience, looming water cuts. So primarily because of the climate change crisis exacerbating the issue, and probably failure in our part to adequately maintain our water infrastructure.
And dealing with that water crisis will be significantly more complicated perhaps than the power crisis, because water is a fundamental right.
Absolutely. It's enshrined in the Bill of Rights, a constitutional right for us as South Africans. So it makes it more complex to actually think about as opposed to the energy crisis. Now, we can draw parallels and lessons learned from the energy crisis in terms of addressing the water crisis, but we do have significantly more social considerations to consider when it comes to water. We've got the environmental considerations and, of course, the significant economic considerations. If you think we could experience almost 0.5% of GDP contraction as a result of water scarcity by 2030 if we don't address the situation.
It's also coming at a time when government coffers are significantly pressurized, and so we see private sector players perhaps coming to the fore. But how can that be navigated? Because in talking about privatization of water, if we want to go so far as to call it that, it raises issues of inequality right at the start.
I think there's a delicate balance here that needs to be done when it comes to addressing water issues, particularly as we bring the private sector into the space. I mean, privatization of water might even be considered a dirty word when actually dealing with it. But I think the key point to make here is that there is an opportunity for the private sector, whether that's through innovative finance mechanisms and bringing to the fore blended finance mechanisms that allows public and private sector to work together around financing water infrastructure, or even looking at innovative models across private sector value chains for them to act as water stewards and promote better water resource management. I think the opportunity is vast, and the key role for public sector is to create an enabling environment for that private sector to actually play and thrive and help solve the water challenge.
Are those discussions already happening? Because if we're in crisis mode, you'd want to believe that the parties are already coming to the table.
So I think the right signals are definitely coming across, both from public sector and private sector. I think there's lessons that were well learned from the energy crisis in terms of how we might expedite this and get private sector involvement sooner rather than later. We've seen some legislation passed that will allow for private sector collaboration when it comes to water. We see the Development Bank of Southern Africa starting to set up specific facilities which involve for private sector to be involved in and finance water infrastructure. So the murmurings are there, but I do think there's a need to accelerate that process, just given where we are. And unlike energy, I mean, we can survive without a couple of hours without power. You can't do the same without water, I'm afraid.
It is a dreary picture that we're outlining here. What are some of the other bright spots? I do believe one of the bright spots is that people are at least starting to have the discussions. What are some of the other bright spots that you've identified that should move us forward to addressing this issue?
So I think in terms of just our experience coming out of the energy crisis, the willingness as South Africans to work across our institutional boundaries and come together to address it. I think we're starting to see that. City of Johannesburg has a task force that actually involves residents to begin to engage to address the water crisis, right? So you're seeing private sector, civil society, and the public sector come together to look at solutions, right, directly in their neighborhoods. And because water is a local issue, a hyper-local issue, you do need that local stakeholder interaction. So I would say that's certainly one bright spark. And I think, just going back to how we managed and dealt with the COVID crisis as a country definitely provides some indicators of lessons that we could bring in to help address the water situation we're currently facing.
Is there any room for new technologies to play a role here? We increasingly hear of AI, artificial intelligence. Water being so traditional, we talk about very aging infrastructure, but is there opportunities that AI perhaps creates in this space?
Absolutely. So, at BCG, one of the things we say is that the water sector at large has missed the tech bubble. We tend to operate as a very traditional engineered sector, right? But we're in a stage where there's significant opportunity to harness the power of AI to deal with really thorny issues when it comes to the water crisis. So, for example, looking at how AI could be deployed to allocate water better so that there's less losses in the system and you know exactly where your water is going. That in turn allows you to value and price water a lot better. A challenge for us. We've seen some of the stories in the media with municipalities owing significant amounts of money to the water service providers. And we can only fundamentally address water seriously in the country if we're going to have a meaningful discussion about its value and price.
Well, on that note, let's leave it there, Dean. Let's hope all the conversations are productive and that we're heading in the right direction to address this crisis. But for today, let's bring our discussion to a close. Dean Muruven is an Associate Director at Boston Consulting Group. And that's where we leave things for today. But there's lots more to come on Business Day TV, so stay tuned.